Hi everyone, welcome to another BAPT webinar. This is the In Conversation With series. We've been going for a few years now. We've had some great guests on and the same again tonight. We've got someone who's been really in the type field, like as a developer of instruments, as an author. He works with type and in his counseling work as well. He developed his, on a psychometric level, been involved with the MBTI steps 1, 2, and 3, the nitty-gritty of the psychology and statistics behind it all. So it's really great to have Mark here. We're just to say as well that BAPT, we've got a conference coming up next year for the 100th anniversary, the centenary of psychological type. That's of the original German version of Carl Jung's Psychological Types book. So we're going to have a symposium, and Mark's become part of the symposium. We've got a conference and a symposium next year, and hopefully we'll hear from Mark some more about his knowledge on the subject. Tonight we're going to have a chat about his life and his background and his work in the field, and have a little chat. So welcome, Mark.
It's good to be here. Hello to everybody, and it's a beautiful day here in the Ozarks. I hope the day is as pleasant for all of you, and that you're staying relatively COVID-free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So where are you joining us? I think you're far from most habitation. Is that right? Where you are now?
Far from what?
Most habitation. You're not near any cities or anything, are you, in the US?
1 hour away from Springfield, Missouri. That's about 150,000 people. But yeah, the closest town is 650 people, and it's 8 miles away. One town in our county, the whole county. So
amazing. So you're saying you were just the Ozark Mountains? Is that where?
The Ozark Mountains, yes. Just north of the border with Arkansas and southern Missouri, and so it's what you would call the real Ozark Mountains. If anybody's ever watched the old TV sitcom The Beverly Hillbillies, if they get on and look at YouTube and get the pilot version of it, it was filmed about 50 miles down the road from me in the hills of. So it is wonderful country.
It must be a beautiful place. Let's talk about your life and how did you first come to learn about psychological type? When did it all begin for you?
Well, at Iowa State University, I was there from 91 through about 93, doing my bachelor's and master's. My major professor was Fred Borgen. His major professor was David Campbell, the Strong Campbell. And so it was a kind of a lineage of psychometricians. And I was reading about the MBTI, and I asked Fred about it, and he said, "No, stay away from that. That's not legitimate research, and psychometrically that." I said, "Okay, Fred." So I worked for a few years on the Strong Interest Inventory, and worked for the publisher CPP, and did the 94 Strong work. Then. When I graduated with my PhD from Nebraska, I had been working all that time with the research department, and I had gotten in on Form M. I was doing the Phiro B work, and Form M came up, and so they needed a grunt to do all the stat analysis for Form M. They'd already gotten the IRT work done in Virginia. And so they would have a request for analysis, they would send it to me, and I would do it. But that was an impersonal research connection. But what happened was, with a huge database I had to play with, I began to look, and my goodness, this is psychometrically sound. And the IRT work that they were doing was very good. And so I thought, well, this is interesting stuff. And I began to look at it. And before I graduated, CPP hired me as a research scientist. And then long and short of it, I was assigned to be the scientist for the Myers-Briggs projects. And I was in charge of those. And so I really began to, admire the work of Isabel Myers, Mary McCauley, and other people. And it was very fascinating. I saw the value of psychological type down at the core of the person, since it is about perception and judgments. As Isabel would say frequently, and Mary McCauley would echo. And so we all perceive, and then we all think about what we have perceived. That's kind of like la-da-da life, you know. There's not an awful lot more to our cognitive experiences. There definitely is, but perception and judgment is at the core of it. So not only do I see this as a legitimate, valuable psychometric and research pursuit, I think it is perhaps the most important that can be looked at. And so that was about, let's see, 99. I started work in 98, and I was assigned to projects in 99. I went to work as the research scientist for the Center for Applications of Psychological Type in 2000. And we were finishing up Form Q. So I finished up doing both jobs, working for CPP and CAPT. And I got to meet a tremendous number of people. And I began the initial work on Step III. I have a wonderful photograph somewhere of Peter and Catherine Myers and all the heads of CPP and folks from all over the world in the break room at CAPT, where I presented what I had found that set the stage for doing a Step III. And very fascinating work. I have a discomfort for big business. I'll just say that. And so I wanted to do my own thing, my own stuff. And I wanted to do things I was not allowed to do because publishers are that way. And that's just a fact of life. And so that's where I began to do things on my own. So
it's a really great story. I mean, you've been really involved at a key point in the development of the MBTI itself. You know, you said in the late 90s, when it had already been around for decades and there'd been a lot of criticisms about the sort of psychometric side. And at that point, they said, we're going to completely kind of redevelop the whole thing. And I guess we still see some of the criticisms that were of the earlier versions kind of cropping up today, even though a lot of it's been changed completely since then. I'm just wondering, you know, is there any way to appease people who doubt this kind of statistical side of what's going on?
Well, so many people have a dog in the fight, so to speak. People that blast the old version, I have to be honest, my favorite version is F, if you're familiar with Form F. It has more in it. And I do not, even though it represents my work, I do not have a tremendous amount of value put on IRT or other kind of fancy things, fancy psychometrics. So when people talk about the poor psychometrics, and I assume they're talking about Form G, Form F, Form J, all these other forms. What I have done so much analysis on it, it's just totally false to begin with. I'm very, very familiar with the Big Five and how it originated. I did my PhD thesis on large data sets from the Strong. And the short of it is I've proven that these instruments developed from large data sets really end up being inaccurate for a large percentage of the population, because they're all based on these normative things, these large average sample sizes, and it's a real problem. And so I proved that that was true, and I didn't win any friends doing that, because a lot of people have their resources, their financial resources tied up in doing those things. And anybody can ask a series of questions about something that they like, evaluate a large sample of the data, and put together an instrument, say, I've developed the instrument that assesses whether or not you like Cheerios. You know, and so anybody could do that if they're able to write a decent question. But you're still going to get a large number of people who may come out in the mid-range on that, and kind of an average score, that don't really like Cheerios. It's just the way that assessments work. And so I really like those older instruments because of their strong relationship with the Jungian theory and Isabel's deep desire to look at blockages in the expression of one's type. A lot of people think, well, the Myers-Briggs is not really about measuring pathology. Well, I'm sorry. That is far from false. It's really dead wrong. Isabel actually had individuals, psychiatrists at mental facilities. She would have them administer the Form J, and she would do the analysis work and sit down with them and talk with them about how you could identify the pathology in the individuals in the mental facility. She loved doing that. And so type itself is not about dysfunction in a human being, but blockages in type express themselves as what we commonly call a lot of problems. So I got off topic, sorry.
I know, it's great. I'm keep thinking of questions that spring off all the things you're saying. And one of them was around the idea of like measuring things and how type, especially the MBTI as an instrument, is different to trait instruments and trait models, in that, you know, the idea of measuring something, I guess, comes from an analogy like measuring the body, like the traits of the human body, like the size of your waist or your length of your arm. Or, you know, there's an analogy taken from measuring physical objects that we take into psychological constructs, and then we sort of apply it as if it was the same thing. And yet then type's different again, because with the MBTI, I mean, you know, am I right in thinking, you know, we're not even then trying to measure how much of something, we're measuring clarity or score, or we're measuring a certainty of how much we think we fit into one category or the other, or one preference, one direction or the other. So do you think that kind of difference is something that's actually caused a lot of the confusion around like type itself, and how?
There's a couple of different things that come up in my mind, Richard. One is Jung talked about that general pull to one side or the other, but he also used words that I have been scolded for in type communities for using. He used a phrase, he said, a too extroverted attitude individual. They're too extroverted. And oh no, you can't be too extroverted. You're either extroverted or introverted. You can't be too much. Well, he very clearly said that you could be, and that'll make a lot of people, bristle when they hear that. But so the measurement community and the type measurement community was very staunch at saying you were one or the other. I was given all the letters that Isabel Myers ever wrote to Mary McCauley to read. As far as I know, I'm the only individual that was ever given them to read. And it's a wonderful insight into the thinking, because she passed away in 1980. And we're talking about this about 2000, where I was working on these things. And she very much believed in what Jung would talk about. Measurement clarity, this yay or nay, introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, perception, judgment, all these things. People say that you are one or the other, and it is true that when it gets right down to it, there will be a tendency to be pulled to one or the other. And Jung referred to that as a type. When you have that tendency, that is a type. But in the measuring, you give these continuous scores. And they say, well, no, they're not continuous. and then psychometricians go, oh, yes, they're continuous. I've created a lot of continuous scores, and I know a continuous score when I see one, and they're continuous scores. And so there's argument prevails. And because the MBTI was forced choice, is forced choice, so you must choose, then there's a problem. There was some measurement noise, and I'll probably get to that, but you end up with this psychometric conundrum. If you say that people can be a little bit on a continuum, and as Jung would say, if you're really developed psychologically, you can recognize and do both. Yes, you will have the pull to one. There's no doubt about that. You will have a type. And don't let me be misunderstood. So there was this argument that was sort of a straw man that took place. And what I like to say is the extent to which an instrument is accurate is the extent to which it accurately places somebody in one type or the other. But there's two parts to that. There is really the component of how extroverted they are functioning in their life or how introverted they are functioning. It is the expression. And the more conscious the individual is about using attitude, E and I, the more that they will be apt at different times to express one or the other. It does not change the biological, natural inclination for that type. I am an extrovert. If I spend too long on the computer, I have a problem. My wife has to come in, load me in the car, put the window down, drive me around like a dog out for a trip. I have to get some energy back. I have to do something. And I know myself when I've overextended myself in the world of introversion. I'm very good at it. I can do 2 or 3 days, and then I need to be locked up for a while. No, I'm joking. So the measurement part created problems for the MBTI community, and it still does to this day. With my own instrument, I know we'll be talking about that later, by not having forced choice, I pulled away from some of that error and some of the problems that happened. And so Isabel's desire, Isabel's father was the head of the National Academy of Sciences. So she, brilliant woman, brilliant father and family. And she went around to all the Ivy League colleges because she had been with her father as a little girl, and she would ask for help psychometrically. How will I develop this thing? And they gave her the best advice they could. And she was relying upon Mary McCullough to sort of research and finish the project out. What Isabel did, a lot of people aren't aware of this. It's the most beautiful thing. And as I would read the letters, I was really touched and struck by this. She would evaluate an item. She would come up with an item and she would give it to people. She would sit down and have a conversation with somebody, probably total strangers, I don't know. And she would ask them about this or that, in mind knowing she was asking a question that would get at their type. And she would evaluate the question. How did people interpret it? How did they answer it? She was the perfect individual, knowing type so well, and having been schooled and a little bit in psychometrics, she knew exactly how to construct questions. Today, they just throw out a bunch of them, run factor analysis and Cronbach alphas and willy-nilly. Oh, we have a scale. I don't buy that. I don't know what you're scaling. What kind of fish is it? But it's real problems with that. So psychometrics got pulled away in the defense of this either or, without accurate descriptions of really what's going on. And because Myers-Briggs was developed as a forced choice instrument, and they were not able to come up with A process scores as I have and look at that level of detail, they weren't able to talk about, as Jung says, those basic psychological functions or mental functions. And if they were, then you would be able to see all 8 of them on continuums. And then it would make a lot more sense to them. They would be a lot more comfortable with that. But digging your heels in and saying it's psychometrically sound and fighting that fight is sort of ridiculous, because you have to say that you are or not a type, one side or the other, in the type community, and this is the truth. Then you say that the instrument must do this or that, but the graduation, the gradation with which a person expresses their type, because we're talking about type expression here. We measure type expression. It's what happens when people respond to questions. That's totally a different thing. So I probably muddied the water more.
No, it's some really interesting things. I mean, what you said a while ago, pointing out that like Jung himself wrote about sort of degrees of type. He talks about normal types, extreme types. Like, he put an element of quantity into it in his book that.
Oh yeah.
So given that then there's the background of the forced choice questionnaires, I'm interested in going to where you took it after that with your Majors PTI and PTE. Like so tell us more about the direction where you developed things on from there.
Well, it's fascinating. It started with some research I did just out of hand, as a professional giving type instruments to people. And then they'd have, it was forced choice. And so I'd say, it's forced choice. Were all of them easy to answer? And they said, no. And typically it would fall along a function continuum. You know, S and N were a booger for them. They couldn't handle it. And so it created real problems for them. Oh, geez. And so I'd say, well, how did you choose? You know, because theoretically they say, well, there's some unconscious motivation to go one way or the other. Well, that's hooey-fooey, technical term. It does not happen. So they would say, well, you know, I just did all to the left, and then a while later I did all to the right, and, you know, eeny, meeny, miny, you know. I thought about this and marked this way, I thought about that, marked that way. Well, psychometrically, we call that measurement noise. That's a problem. And so I knew that when you force them to choose and they can't choose or don't want to choose, then you are opening the door for noise in your measurement. And so I said, well, I'd like to develop one that has not Likert scale, not a continuum, but has a neutral. And the neutral, when it is hit or selected, means that the item is not even included into the analysis. They say, for me, this item does not work. So why would I want to include it? So I began to collect some data on some of the things that I had constructed. And some of the first things I had constructed was E and I, because, you know, that's so obvious. It seems to be an easy one to measure for me anyway. And so if everyone selected neutral, a group of people selected neutral, let's say 10 or 15 people, excuse me, I'm gonna set this down, selected neutral, and they all selected neutral on the same item, I would analyze their results. So there's 10 items on the EI scale, and I would analyze the 9 items, and I would do an alpha. And guess what? The alpha was better than it would be on average for people with the 10 items. Psychometrically, that, you know, not supposed to happen. So I began to recognize when you take what they have given you without forcing them, you get accurate information. So if a person responds neutral on 6 items on the EI scale and they respond on the other 4 items, I know that that information that I've gotten is accurate. So I developed it with, well, getting into the 8 process scores, the 8 functions. I wanted to develop it with how like me, very like me. And people say, well, why did you do that? Because we're really asking them to assess themselves and say how much it is like them. You can't ask novice people to take an assessment and have some deep psychological meaning to all your answers. You have to keep it simple and just saying how much it's like you. Be found meeting people, be found reading a book. It's one of my EI items. How much is that like you? Well, I do both, right? And instructions say, pick the one that's just a little bit more like you than the others. And they say, well, this is somewhat like me. In the old paper pencil version, I had people that would go down and answer to both sides all the way down. Very irritating. I have to do it again. But that's the truth. Jung says we have all of these. We only have a type when the preponderance of times and in the depth of our psychological driving, we're pulled to one side or the other. And we are all pulled to one side or the other. We're constantly going in the ditch. And so by not having forced choice, I noticed right away measurement noise is greatly reduced. that if I evaluated what I had, I would get excellent stuff. If I group people based on the item or items that they had omitted, put neutral on, I would get great results. And so psychometrically, that told me that I was really on to something. And so, and it also, as it says in the manual, gives you two pieces of information. It gives you not only the choice, left or right, but they're saying how much it's like them. And like ISTJs, they'll tend not to be extreme on any response, but when they are, they really mean it. You know, it's really like them. They're saying that's like me. And so it becomes very important piece of information, and the difficult way that, long way that it calculated the A process scores, they're really saying how much I express it. How much when you say this is like me, you're saying how much I express this. You know, and so it became very important for me for long-term being able to calculate the scores we see in PT-Elements, the A process scores, the subscales, and the personality formation information, which is really the blockages that we've talked about in expressing your type.
Tell me more about that then, the sort of personality blockages. How do you ask questions about that, and what have you found from it?
I found it to be incredibly accurate. For example, if you, I'm going to pull up something here. I'm not going to share it. Because I am the worst person to remember things. There we go. Being a dyslexic, which I am, I have problems with names, and I have problems with remembering the names of things and the names of people. Even though I may have known them 15 years, I may look at them and not know their name, which is kind of interesting, really. I smile, and in church, I just say, hey, brother, hey, sister, and I get a pass. But when it comes to my own instruments and the names, I will mess it up if I don't have it in front of me. Okay, scales. Question. Okay, I probably have it here. Sorry.
Let's look at another question, and this one's around. We've got a question from Louise, who put it in the chat, and it was about, he's saying if someone's basically scoring as neutral, I think she's saying, you know, might that also be like Jung's, like balanced, as she puts it? So I guess that's a sense of, I guess she's getting at the sort of the idea of transcending opposites, and perhaps they've developed to a point where they are more neutral. I mean, does that kind of make sense to you from how I've described it?
Yeah, it does. Why people pick neutral varies tremendously. And you can say, and I'm sure that it's sometimes accurate, that they are conflicted on this particular type indice, this dimension. And there may be a blockage to that type dimension. I'll give you an example. I had a young individual many years ago who came out ENTP on the personality elements. And talking to him, I knew he was not T. And so what had happened in his youth, he had come across a very horrible situation, and he was told to deny his feelings. The way you feel isn't right. You didn't see that, you know, almost like the opera Tommy by The Who, you know, you didn't see it, you didn't hear it, you know. And so he began this process of trying to be logical, because relational and feelings will curse you. So his model was Spock. He loved Star Trek and he wanted to be like Mr. Spock, but he got depressed and committed suicide. Almost, well, tried to commit suicide. Obviously he didn't, because he's talking to me. So we began to talk about it, and he hit neutral on a lot of those, but the ones he did not, about there's 13 on that scale. And so I believe it's about 6 he hit neutral on, and the 7 he did not. He was extreme to the T. His pathology was total denial of his whole judgment self. He was in denial, and he was constructing a way of evaluating that which he perceived that was totally against his innate ability, and it was totally foreign. He could laugh about it, but it could not fit, because at the end of the day, when he was alone, he would feel, and he would really relationally weep over things and stuff, and it was tearing him up. And his relationship with the spouse was deteriorating. And so that's a reason for hitting a neutral. I write poorly, I believe. I've been told that I'm not supposed to. You're supposed to write 8th grade level, and I write somewhere above that, and I can't help it. They pounded that into my head for 12 years, and so that's what comes out. And so some people look at the questions down in rural Florida, very rural northern Florida, where Bubba and Marcel live. And that's just sort of the acronym that you use, and actually about 1/3 of the people call each other Bubba. So Bubba doesn't read and write. I was surprised. Suwannee County, where I live, had the 2nd largest rate of, they weren't able to read or write at all. I mean, it's just, we think of poor IQ, but I mean, these people did not, they barely made it to 5th grade. They would sign their checks with an X, and I couldn't believe it. This is 2004, 2005. I said, wow, people are still doing this. Bubba would do a lot of neutrals and tell me that, Dr. Mark, you use a lot of them 25-cent words. And so not understanding the question, not being able to make a choice, some type development issue that has happened. Jung in his later years, and Beebe and other authors use other terms for this, but in the simplest term, and I'm simple as a counselor, somebody messed them up, and so they cannot express that which should be forthcoming and easy, and they have a blockage to it. And that's where a lot of my work is with personal individuals, as something that's happened and they dislike some element of themselves. They want to be something different. So.
Thank you. Yes, it certainly is that, that polarizing against certain processes over others, and having that internal tension, I guess, is one of the biggest things that type is really about.
Yeah.
So you're saying before you worked with a lot of couples as well. So
A lot.
how have you seen it playing? You've worked with a lot of couples, so how have you seen, these internal tensions and external conflicts and things playing out with the way you use the 8 functions and your instruments?
Yeah, the last 8 years, probably about 550 couples, and all of them assessed with type, the personality elements, and so I have a great deal of typological information on them. And as I was telling you earlier, most people are not equipped to regurgitate our psychological mumbo jumbo, and that's really how they see it. And we can talk as if it's sophisticated stuff and good stuff and all that, but the truth is they're not interested in that. When a couple comes to see me because they have problems, they want me to help their marriage. That's what they're interested in. And so I have to use the simplest of terms. And so I give them the assessment. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Richard, very often I will not get past E and I with them because that may be the basis of the majority of the tension in their marriage. One of them's E, one of them's I, and they do misattributions continuously based upon natural type expression. He's an I, and he comes home and he needs some quiet moments, pull himself together, change his clothes, shower, whatever. She's an E, and she gets home and, hey, what are we doing? You want to go out to eat? And like intensely being extroverted with him. And he's just thinking, get away from me. You're the energy vampire and you're here to suck the last ounce of energy out of me. And, I can't function. And he would say, why can't we just relax and stay home? And she'd say, why don't you ever want to do things? Why don't you ever want to go out? Go out, he says. That's all you want to do is go out, be around your friends. I'm not enough, he says. And she says, you're so stuck up. You don't like anybody. The battle lines are drawn, E and I. The verbiage, I could go on for hours of the words that they use, the phrases they use, and it's repetitive. I can't tell you how often I hear the same thing over and over and over. And just helping them understand the difference and allowing them to give each other space, non-condemning language, no misattributions, things change. Probably 2/3 of the time, I get into all the other indices, the other mental functions, and it becomes very, very powerful. I don't go into great detail, and I very seldom go into like introverted sensing or stuff like that. I might mention it, like in the case of me and my spouse, we're opposites. Her dominant function's introverted sensing, I'm extroverted intuitive. And so my inferior is introverted sensing and her inferior is, and so we laugh a great deal because your choices are get irritated or laugh. And we chose a long time ago to laugh because we're two of the silliest people. And that's just the way that dominant inferior thing look at each other in a healthy way. When you do that, you can actually learn. So I teach them these things. I give them techniques and stuff about these differences. And I teach them the importance of having fun with these differences and not being burned down or be a slave to the way that they were taught and learned. If one of them came from a household where most of the people in the household were similar, and then they marry somebody who's different, but as a child, they were told, don't you be hanging around people like that, and then they marry one. Oh my goodness gracious, So I find that people get great help by just looking at those dichotomies. People push, you got to do whole type. No, not really. Um, that's not very Jungian. and and the A process scores, I'll just share one little thing. I might share more, but right now, one little thing that I found incredibly important. It has to do with extroversion and introversion, which are not directly scored in the 8 process score. But if you add up all 4 extroverted scores, extroverted sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and all 4 introverted scores, the same, and you look at the totals, if you got a 40-point difference between the two, then you will probably see manifest in that relationship, or if it's an individual, and their relationships. The problems that Jung describes very clearly in chapter 10 that take place, and he called it they're being too extreme. He would say that. For the extrovert, they will focus in on the object to the exclusion of all else, deny the existence of their spouse, children, everybody else in the relationship, create great conflict and pain, but say, well, I had to. I had to deny you. You know, I was pulled to this object. They don't say that, but their behavior is they are pulled to the object. I do a fair amount of work and intervention in the lives of pastors who frequently get involved, and they will say, I'm serving the church. Well, anyone that's a biblical scholar knows that's baloney. Their priority is supposed to be their spouse. The church is way down on the priority list, even as pastor. They will deny their spouse or children just to serve the church, and they get into trouble. Extroverted pastors will do that. People who deny all these relationships around them to focus on that object, person, place, thing, activity, whatever it is, will get into big trouble. So that 40-point difference, boom, you can ask them a question. Have you ever gotten in trouble by getting involved in something and to the point of forgetting your spouse and everything that goes on? And their head will go down. And they'll say, yeah, a bunch of times. Now, it happens probably to all extroverts at some time, not necessarily, but probably most. But for some people, they will have a pattern of doing that, and that's the problem to deal with. Now, the introvert has an equally irritating conundrum on the other side. They will think subjectively and believe. I found this with INTJs. They do this in such an interesting way. I love talking with them. I have thought about it, they say, and I have thought long about it, and I believe this is a blackboard. When it's a whiteboard, in reality, no, it's a blackboard. I've thought about it, and my thinking is accurate, my subjective life. And so I ask them, do you ever get in arguments about what you believe? And they go, their head goes, consistently will get in arguments at different times, especially when they're tired. They will get in this trap. So that 40 points to the eye will make them overly believe and rely upon that subjective thinking, that subjective life, and reject external disconfirming information. Just doesn't matter what the extroverts say. It doesn't matter what's out there. You know, I thought about it and I'm right, or that's my subjective thought. And often it occurs in silence. They don't say anything, but they may become bitter and cynical, and people notice that. So.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing if you see 2 introverts getting into an argument on social media, and both of their subjective realities are ultimately true, right? You know, there's no convincing either one or the other. You know, so I think, you know, we can see some great examples of this, and I've been in it myself. But
Oh yeah,
it's great that we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute, unfortunately, because of the time. But I think you beautifully described, bringing back to Jung's description of subject and object of introversion and extroversion, understanding how the dynamics between those things actually describe his idea. Before we go, I'd like to just point out to people, you've got your Majors PTI and PT instruments, that people can use to help them determine type. So that I've used them myself quite a lot in my practice, and I know you're developing with a new online system as well. Where can people find out more, and what qualifications do they need to be able to access your tools?
Well, typically, the normal educative qualifications, do they call it level A in UK?
It used to be, yeah. It's now test user, occupational personality. Yeah.
We call it, B level. Yeah. And typically, if they've had training in some form of training in assessment psychometrics, and they have some knowledge of, have gained knowledge of type, then they're able to purchase. They have to provide that information to the publishers. It's not very difficult. If you've been to some type trainings, that typically would qualify you, and the publisher will require you to get the manual, read it, know what you're doing, and understand it. I try to be available for questions to just about anybody that they may have. There are 3 publishers in the US. The new one coming online is the first one I ever had. And so we're redeveloping things. The PTI is almost ready. The PTE will be ready soon. There are 2 other instruments. The OEM, the Occupational Environment Measure, which measures interest and disinterest. And I have a whole, I'd love to talk with you sometime, Richard, about that, because I know that's your area. And then a spiritual gifts inventory. That's also, they'll all be published through leadersbeacon.com. And it's Chris Kyler, who used to be the old 16 Types. Many years ago, he was my first publisher, and he's maintained the rights ever since. And so he's republishing, and we're redoing some things. And so the PTI will probably be released, I would say, sometime this month. We're in testing with it right now to get the bugs out of the system. There's also Aurelius Press with Gary Monty, and the Breckenridge Institute with Mark Bernardzik. They basically, things have been the same there for a long time. They've been publishing, and basically do not market much or anything, but for the time being, you could check out leadersbeacon.com and find out when things are available. The PTI will be released, and it has the 8 process scores, the 8 mental functions in it. And so new forms of reports, and of course a professional report. So to be able to do that, that's coming out real soon. In Australia, Acer has the PTI and the PTE. In Brazil, there's Oseas Eckhart and his company. Let's see, am I forgetting somebody? I think that's about it.
That's great. So yeah, lots of exciting developments going on. And it's great that, your instruments as well, they go to beyond what the sort of dichotomy-based sort of type instruments do. And, in terms of quantifying the expression of the 8 processes, the 8 functions, or function attitudes, as you all might call them, other people might call them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really useful things.
They're really fascinating 8 process scores when you can look at the ipsative difference between dominant and inferior. And it can really tell you, like for me, I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't know introverted sensing if it was a truck and it hit me. I just, don't have the ability to know really what it is. I can describe it at some level. And as you pointed out, I do a poor job, but that's very, very important.
Thank you. Someone's asking what is Mark's type? So Catherine said. I think you said before ENFP, right? That was your type.
Yes, ENFP.
So I'm going to have to sign off.
All day, every day.
From an INTJ to an ENFP, I'm going to have to say goodnight now and sign us off. It's nearly been an hour. It's been a fantastic discussion. I'd really like to get you back sometime for some, we can unpack some of the other stuff around the research using your instruments and things as well. I know we had Mina on a while ago on this webinar. So, there's loads of stuff to talk about. It's really been a pleasure. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you take care and out there in Missouri, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for coming. Bye-bye.